Okay, well, I'm really excited about this. This is Reimagining Distribution. It's part of a Reimagining the Ecosystem series presented by Screenovators and Usher. Screenovators is the online community for innovation in the screen industries. It's free to join, and you can find it at screenovators.com. And come and join us where we can talk about, all of these exciting touch points in the industry and how we can maybe do things differently and move things forward. My name is Alex Stoltz. I'm head of film at Usher, and I also run a company called Future of Film. Innovation in screen storytelling film is my passion, and my background is distribution and audiences. So this is a sweet spot for me. I'm really excited to be having this conversation and delighted that we are joined today by Avril Speaks and Brandon Purdie, who I will ask to introduce shortly. We were also expecting Benny from Move in Belgium to give some more Europe representation to this conversation. Unfortunately, Benny, like me last week, is unwell, so can't join us. But I think we're going to have a great conversation here. I'll do my best to represent Europe in this conversation. But look, I'd love to. I think it would just be great if I could just first hand over to Avril, if that's okay. Just introduce yourself, give people an idea of your background. And actually, I forgot to ask, whereabouts are you in the world today?
I'm in Los Angeles. I'm in
Yes.
LA. Sunny
Yes.
California.
Rainy California. No, I don't know.
There's been a lot of rain lately. I've lived here for 12 years now, and we've probably gotten the most rain in the last, week than we've gotten the whole 12 years that I've lived here. So, but we haven't washed away. We're still here.
That's good.
So yeah, my name is Avril. I am a producer, also a director, but primarily a producer. I've worked mostly in film, producing feature films. I also do some producing in television as well, mostly in the doc space, on the television side, docs and docuseries. I'm part of a group called Distribution Advocates, and that's kind of who I'm representing here today. And Distribution Advocates is basically a group of producers who came together during the pandemic, just, while everybody was having these conversations about, how are we going to get back to work? What's the future of film? We started having conversations specifically around distribution and talking about some of the challenges that we were all facing as producers, and try to think of some innovative ways and new ways to kind of get around those and reimagine what distribution could look like. So a lot of my work right now is focused around producing, but then also doing advocacy work for Distribution Advocates, which we just came out with a podcast available on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, anywhere where you listen to podcasts. It's called Distribution Advocates Presents.
Great to get the podcast promo in there. Looking forward to checking that out. This sounds like a great conversation for you, Avril, and love to hear more about what you're advocating for in distribution. But let me hand over to Brandon briefly now. Brandon, just great to see you again, man.
Great to see you again. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been in theatrical distribution for 24 years and have worked on, about 100 different films theatrically, but have done the distribution probably more on like 75. I've been in cinema or theatrical distribution since I was 14. That's all I've ever done, and I love it. And it's kind of like my hobby and my passion and my job all rolled into one. And so I feel lucky to have that. I had my own company for the last 15 years. About a year ago, Angel Studios approached me to come on and help build their theatrical distribution. I joined last February, the company, and we had a pretty great year. All in all, a wild ride, but it's been a really exciting time with our releases. We have a really exciting slate of films coming up over the next 3 years. So anyways, excited to be here.
Thank you so much. And I mean, it was a bit of an understatement about your year last year, and some incredible successes and innovation along the way in terms of getting those films out there and new approaches to working with audiences. So really want to get into that. So where to start? So I guess distribution has evolved, right? It's evolved from the original meaning of the words, where it's literally more of a logistics piece where you're looking to move. I'm old enough to remember when we had 35mm reels to move around in vans and all of that side of the piece. But you had that original, task of getting the films out there. It's still part of a process, of course, and still an important part of the process. But then I guess distribution then evolved into more of a campaign-led process where you have a fairly short window to get people's attention, and then you plaster them with advertising and hope that they turn up and buy tickets at the theater, and then you have another chance to maybe sell some stuff down the line on DVD or home entertainment. But again, I feel like we've evolved again from that. That's still part of the process, but there's a lot more to distribution, or successful distribution now, it feels. We have distribution as a community, or a way to bring a community together. There's distribution as label. I guess that's been there for a while, but the idea of a brand, what does it stand for? How do we cut through with our unique perspective and our unique kind of taste? And I guess you could look at one end of a spectrum of that being A24, but there's other great examples of labels out there. There's also about distribution as partnership and a network of partnership, as opposed to just like a network of outlets, and that feels like increasingly like an important way distribution is evolving. And I say that, so I feel like that there's a process of evolution here, and it's yes, you're still going to get the big blockbusters being TV, Super Bowl ads, and you're going to have in thousands of theaters, and it's just going to have that sort of blast. But beneath that, or alongside that, there's a growing some shifts happening, and that's what I want to explore in this conversation. I think it's sort of looking more into those evolutions of what it means, and how we can lean into that as as distributors ourselves, or as part of the ecosystem, and to get the diverse range of films and voices out there. I think all of this starts with a film, doesn't it? It starts with a piece of creative work, a piece of storytelling. And I think a great point, maybe, Avril, to pass to you, really, to sort of say, I know you're a producer, your background is in show running and producing, and I'd love to hear your perspective, whether you see the current system working, where you don't see it working, and what, as distribution advocates, what you're advocating for.
I think a great place to start is in terms of what we're advocating for. I think one thing that we recognized when we started was, not just when we started, but even in these, I guess it's been 4 years now since we first started having those meetings, and realizing the disconnect. And I think for us, the big thing that we try to push, especially now since we've been doing this podcast, we're really pushing audience and really getting people to think about who is your audience for your film, because there seems to be, in the industry as a whole, there seems to be a disconnect with filmmakers who make films to be seen by an audience. And then what? It's like all of us want our films to be seen, and then oftentimes what we were seeing, again, Distribution Advocates is a group of producers. So all of us were kind of coming together and sharing similar stories, where we would work with filmmakers and we'd say, okay, let's figure out what our game plan is. And the game plan for a lot of filmmakers is, well, I'm going to make the film, and then we'll premiere at Sundance, or we'll premiere at, a top tier festival, and then we'll get distribution and everything will be great. And realizing that we're just not really in that era anymore, where you could go to a film festival and walk out. It was like an auction, and you're walking out with these big sales. We did a study a couple of years ago where we actually looked at the films that played in Sundance and tried to evaluate how many of those films actually get distribution afterwards. And 80% of the films that came out of Sundance did not get a distribution deal. So you're looking at the majority of films that, play in a top tier festival and, spend a lot of money to go to the festival, to play in the festival. And then, the film is kind of in this, state of limbo where no one can see it. And so our goal is it's not even so much to disparage Sundance and say don't apply there. It's more to say the money that is spent on specific film festivals, what would happen if we spent that money for our audience, cultivating an audience, and just imagining what that could look like if we were to think that way in terms of filmmakers. We also acknowledge that there's the disconnect in terms of, you distribute a film. What happens if you do get a distributor? Where's that film being shown? It's like distribution is also these tentacles of exhibition and also marketing, right? And so a lot of theaters are closing, and again, when we started having our conversations was right during COVID, when you were seeing left and right, we're right here in LA, we have a huge ArcLight was like a huge, multiplex in LA that shut down during COVID. And so we were seeing left and right theaters getting shut down. I just saw an article last night in IndieWire about a lot of big cities that have big populations are losing cinemas. So I think Chicago went from like 32 cinemas to half the amount of cinemas. So we're losing those venues, which present new challenges, right? We have so many channels. There's so many streamers and there's so many channels, and everybody has whether you're on Roku or Apple or whatever, there's a lot of channels. But then you're also looking at the fact that many of those companies are combining, they're becoming conglomerates. So there are a lot of channels owned by one company. So we're looking at all of the challenges that all of those issues present, and trying to think through how do we navigate that as filmmakers, and what should we be thinking about, again, as it relates to audience. And I think at the end of the day, it really comes back to that. Who is our audience? Who is the audience for the film? And what's the best way to reach them? And I think that the industry has some answers with that. But as filmmakers, it's really trying to empower filmmakers to think through, like, who is your audience? And what is the best way to reach them? And what's the best strategy, the best use of dollars, the best companies to community organizations, companies, or what have you, to partner with in order to reach that audience is kind of our key.
Well, it makes so much sense. And it's just as a thought process to go. Amazing how many filmmakers don't go through that process. I think it actually had Kevin Getz from Screen Engine on the show a few times, and his I love his thing. It's like if you say a film, when you ask a filmmaker who the movie's for, and if they say it's for everyone, that means it's for no one. And it's to actually really think strategically and precisely of who your audience is really important. But I suppose that just makes sense, and it's something which people should have that, go through that process. And I guess some of the things that people struggle with is access to data. How do I benchmark that? How do I know what the audience for this other film, which I think is similar to mine, actually was? So you can kind of sort of go for it on a philosophical level, but having some data would be really helpful for that process. Is that something which has sort of come up in your conversations, or how you can sort of model that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's another issue as well. There used to be, you mentioned Windows, right? Like you were talking about, like the Windows system that has pretty much gone away now. And we don't have a metric to measure, is my film doing well? Is it not doing well? And I also think what goes along with that too is transparency. I mean, a lot of filmmakers have distribution deals that we have no idea where the film is playing. We have no idea how it's performing. And, you kind of get these very generic statements. And so there's no transparency about how well a film is doing in order to be able to make decisions that make sense for your film. I saw someone put in the chat, it's also, those contracts in and of themselves, then it gets to a sustainability issue too, because you can make a film. I've made films for next to nothing that, I thought for sure we're going to get this distributed and it's going to make its money back. And even for that little bit of money, we weren't able to break even, again, for a number of reasons. But, it's like the way that the contracts are written are not always in favor of the filmmakers in terms of having some say about where the film is playing, how the film is marketed. They might be long-term contracts, which is, and again, this is some of those things that as distribution advocates, one of the first things that we did as a collective was to create a cheat sheet for filmmakers to kind of, you need to look at what are the terms of that agreement, to look at what are the territories where your film is going to be playing, and just kind of give a checklist that filmmakers could look at as they're trying to negotiate distribution, just to try to make it a little bit more fair. Get a fair deal for filmmakers. But yes, going back to your question about numbers, yeah, we don't really have the metrics to evaluate not just how our film is doing, but also where our film is going. It's kind of like, you can sell a film to, say a Disney company, and then it just becomes Disney Plus, and it's just there, like in the Disney Plus universe. So it's just become really difficult to be able to track a film in terms of its whereabouts, but also in terms of sales and how it's performing.
Yeah, I mean, we had that Netflix data dump, didn't we, like end of last year, which I think left as many questions, raised as many questions as answered them in terms of, how do you use this data? But at least it was something, and appreciate. We were due to have Sanne Juncker Pedersen on this podcast or webinar as well, but unfortunately we weren't able to make it due to so I was ill last week and schedules and so on. But I mentioned Sanne in this context because I think what they're doing with the DFI, the Danish Film Institute, in this space is really exciting. They are, and this is only for the publicly funded films. It's not for every single movie, and I know it's very different in the US, but they have this incredible system where they bring audience insights into the production process and embed it in there, and they give them access to data. They've bought, I think, a whole lot of streaming data, which they make available. In fact, I think that's available to everyone, actually. They make it available, and then they have some sort of qualitative audience insights they bring into the process, not to say yes or no to the green light, but just to embed it in there. And I think really, really progressive, exciting, but maybe not. This is it. This is where it becomes really hard to scale that or without public funding. But it's a really interesting direction, I think. But so much to pick up on there, I think, in terms of these big challenges for the industry and distribution in general. But if I could just hand over to Brandon here, Brandon, I'd love to just see your reflections on what Avril was saying there, really, I suppose, and Angel Studios, how your approach is different to a lot of sort of traditional distribution.
I think the way that we operate is just fundamentally different than it. Some of the things that are different is that, and one of the things I think that's missing in distribution and virtually is having a meaningful ongoing conversation with audiences. Not that I think the audiences should decide be the only people to decide what movies get made. I don't know if I would love the cinema as much if artists didn't drive that. But I think that from an economic standpoint, it's really, really important that we understand what the audience is wanting, and that we stop this majority of films being made aspirationally, like what should audiences want, instead of what are they wanting, and then how do we deliver a story that does its work, you know. So one of the ways that Angel is different, and that is that we have what's called the Angel Guild. It's 250,000 people, I think, right now, roughly. It's growing fast. That group of individuals are people who've invested in our projects, or who have become a part of the guild in many different ways, and they get a vote on what content we distribute. So anybody can come to Angel. They can submit in one of two ways. They can submit a torch, you know, if it's an animated movie, an animatic, or they can, and a torch is a short concept of a film, whether it's 5 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. And so they don't have to produce a film, but they can come with a concept. And then they put that concept into the guild, and the guild votes on it, or a feature film and the guild votes on it. If it scores high enough in the guild, then those movies we start to look at as, you know, we're going to distribute this how and where and when, and we start looking at it. I'm specifically in the theatrical side. So all the films that we've put out this last year all have passed the Angel Guild. So the guild also gets, you know, 2 free tickets to every one of the movies we put out. They get a vote on content and shape kind of what's happening. That's why our opening weekends have a really strong built-in box office, is because that group of people, instead of us taking the movie to the theater to find out if we have an audience, we're going to the cinema opening weekend with the audience to help build the show, to kind of celebrate its creation. I think that fundamentally is just very different. What I like about it is that it takes out that kind of hurdle of like, are the majority of films that are getting made and getting put out or in the indie space, is it from the artists who have the real story to tell or the talent, or are they the people who are best at raising funds? So I love the idea that like a 10 or 15-minute concept could be made, put in the guild. We've had them made, you know, $5,000, $500 that have become feature films we've helped crowdsource the money, and that have been made for, you know, 5 or 6 or 10 or $12 million, and we've put out in theaters wide. Could the filmmaker have come up with that money? I don't know, but having that approach with the audience is really beneficial. So Angel, I think one of their core things is that they're just really good at having that conversation. Like over and over, people are voting, they're talking about it, they're crowdfunding, and then we're releasing the content broadly. So globally.
The global thing is huge. Obviously, a big differentiator as well for the company. For the, I forgot what you call them, the promos or the
Torches. Yeah, we call
torches.
them, we call them torches, kind of harkening back to when the Statue of Liberty was getting pitched to be built. I'm going to forget all the names and stuff, so I'm just going to give a really high level overview. But the money wasn't able to be raised to make the entire Statue of Liberty, and instead there was enough money to make the torch. And then they took the torch and they put it out in public space, and people could buy shares or give money to be able to help build the rest of it. So it was really one of the first effective crowdfundings that was building this piece of art. And so we call the films that come into the Angel Guild torches. And then those get voted on, and can they raise the money, and do audiences get behind it? And then that's where audiences vote. Yeah.
Love it. I'd never heard that story. And the filmmakers fund the torches themselves and then offer them up. Is that how it works? So
It can work that way. There's also some internal resources that people submit, and it kind of has support or has the audience behind it. There's some different mechanisms, but yeah, generally they're bringing, you know, the film that we put out, The Shift, last year came to us as a torch, as a short film. And I'm not sure what the production budget was, but it was under $1,000. So
yeah,
it came to us as a short film, and then that's what went into the guild and got tested, and then we on over 2,000 screens in December, and then it's now opening up around the globe, you know, market by market.
And your guild then are your super fans, I guess, as well. So they're selecting what to support, but they're also going to be supporting it when it emerges and shouting about it. And I suppose you also have them as a model of the kind of audience you want to then tap into based on their support.
Yeah, I mean, because this group is growing really fast and rapidly, because they're voting on the content, because of our belief that ownership is important to an audience, to feel like they have some ownership in the content. You know, whether they put $5 or $10 into a movie to help the marketing budget, or they put $5,000 or more, there's a sense of ownership of that content. They fund if they put money into the film or the marketing, their names in the credits, and they get special early access to see the content. So we have that audience is very invested in the show. You know, if you put money into a show you care about, even if it's a micro investment and you put that in there, the likelihood of you going to the cinema on opening weekend is high. But our goal is, I mean, I should say my personal goal theatrically, what I want to accomplish is taking films with purpose. You know, Angel's kind of broad mission is to tell stories that amplify light. And my hope is that to make purpose popular, to bring content like unapologetically what it is, telling stories that amplify light, and then taking it to a broad audience. So yeah, we focus on the Angel Guild. I mean, that is why we're called Angel Studios, is because of the angels that invest in the projects. But also, how do we get this film to a broader audience? And so I think part of this thing with creation of content is like, do you have an audience is an important question. Is there an audience is an important question. And are you talking to this audience regularly? You know, because it's one thing to have an ongoing dialogue and then bring them content. It's another thing to just show up into the marketplace and just say, buy this. You know, it's a very different thing where people can contribute. And so that's kind of been our recipe for success, I feel like, is this idea that the audience will, the collective wisdom of the audience more effective than a room full of executives.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a shot. And based on results last year, Sound of Freedom and so on, certainly seems to be paying dividends. The wisdom of the crowd puts into practice. I guess we sort of come back a little bit to how that can be used by filmmakers at that earlier stage. Outside of that space, you've built an ecosystem there, built around that purpose and built that vision. And you know, is it possible? Is it even realistic to expect a filmmaker to be able to tap into that crowd-based knowledge? I mean, Avril, I suppose that lends a question about crowdfunding. You know, are you seeing that being used much in the space at the moment?
In terms of distribution?
I'm just thinking, yeah, in terms of the crowdfunding, are filmmakers using crowdfunding a lot? Have you noticed, like, in Sundance this year? And is that an effective way to build that audience understanding at the outset?
Yeah, in a sense, I think what's really interesting and what's unique about what Brandon is doing in Angel Studios is that you're using that funding data as part of the creation of the thing, but then also continuing that into distribution. And I feel like that's kind of where a lot of filmmakers, where we kind of things get off. You know, I've used crowdfunding, and I think a lot of filmmakers think about crowdfunding in the sense of like, oh, I got to make, I need to raise money to make the film, and it's almost kind of like an isolated thing, although it does very much prove that there's an audience, you know what I mean, that people want to see it. And to Brandon's point, I think when people are putting money into it, they're going to support it. And I think that there's evidence of that. I did a film that, produced a film, and we crowdsourced for production, like for funding, and had a great run. And all those people showed up when we made the film, and the film started, and it did start playing in festivals and went around. Those people came out to those regional festivals and they told their friends. And in our mind, that was going to translate, once the film was distributed, and it didn't translate. Again, coming back to those issues of marketing and available theaters as well. So I kind of feel like that's kind of where the disconnect, it starts to kind of break down for a lot of filmmakers. But yeah, I do think that, you know, crowdfunding, it's a very direct metric. It's a direct way of knowing, do people want to see this? I've worked for companies before that, you know, go, okay, this brand, you know, even in terms of brand, not brand marketing, but, you know, companies that have like a specific brand, and they're starting to say, we have a brand that's very popular online. Let's do a test of a show and put an example of that online. And then we can use that as a pilot, if you will, for a larger project, for a feature, for a TV series, or what have you. And so I think any ways we can, as filmmakers, can think about these kind of processes for crowdfunding, whether it's in a literal sense or, you know, like a test case scenario, will help us in identifying where those audiences are and who's actually interested in these, you know, who's going to support the films that we're making.
Yeah. It's approaching it more as a, I'm not saying not currently, you know, we're not currently approaching it as a business, but it is approaching it like a business in a more sustainable way, as opposed to what you got one shot. If you get into Sundance, which you think you've made it if you get into Sundance, of course, and then you, like you say, you know, 80% don't go, you know, don't get the deal from that. But you've got that one shot. Whereas thinking about your storytelling strategically and how to build that up over time, with a film being a component of that, might be a you know, it's a different way to approach it, and using some of the distribution channels which are free, which are accessible to everyone, and you can cultivate that audience. So, by the way, I wanted to say, if you please put questions in the Q&A or the chat, we can keep an eye on each, and we'll try to get to them before the end of the session. So we've talked about sort of building that audience thinking into the process. We've looked at how Angel Studios are using those tools. What about this idea of, you know, we touched on it again there, Avril, you know, brands and identities? We've got one of the biggest challenges in distribution in any any form of work where you're trying to get people's attention, you're trying to get people's interest in something, is just the sheer kind of crazy volume of content out there, and you know, so many platforms, and everyone's in their own ecosystem. So it's, you know, how do we cut through that, and how can we cut through, I suppose. I think that's the biggest question that most distributors face on a daily basis, is trying to, like, how do we get the marketing across to the audience, and how do we, you know, impress upon, we've got this limited window, call to action. I don't know, you know, Brandon, in terms of your you know, your promotional strategies, or your, you know, if you've had any, you know, how you sort of you know, tackle that challenge.
How are we tackling cutting through? Is that what the
Yeah.
question is? Yeah. I mean, so that's, you know, one of the things that makes Angel Studios unique is, you know, because I've been doing distribution at a lot of different levels, you know, for years, films that were made for under $100,000. And, you know, one year I distributed 11 movies with my company, and not one of them was made for more than 100 grand. So, you know, you sometimes feel like you're whispering in a busy city trying to be heard. But one of the things from that experience, now being at Angel, that I think is so unique is they have a deep background. The founders of Angel Studios have a deep background in digital marketing. So the idea of buying, you know, vanity marketing for opening weekend and just kind of being everywhere, and every TV show and the Super Bowl and every, you know, millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, and marketing just broadly, and then hoping that by opening weekend you have an audience. You know, we really do an opposite approach, to where we're really focused on the individual, focused on the audience. But more than anything is just, I think Angel, their marketing team, again, I don't run that marketing team. We have our CMO is Alex Nelson, and we have a large marketing team. But I think the thing that I've seen over the last year that we do, that I have not seen a lot of people do in distribution, is listen. like ask like lots of questions, put out lots of content, but like listening to the audience, like, what is working and what is selling. And so one of our things we do is we pre-sell. We start our pre-sale campaigns very early, 8 weeks early. Like Cabrini has been on that we have coming out March 8th on International Women's Day. That movie we started pre-selling 8 weeks before its opening day. And you have a lot of time to have a dialogue with the audience and kind of see what's working and what's not working, and kind of all those assumptions that we have as both distributors and filmmakers, where we think, oh, this is going to really work. And then we start talking with the audience and we realize that's really not going to work. And we have to find new things. One of the things, so digital marketing is heavily what we do. We have a really different approach to the broader marketing. But it's definitely more, everything is data driven. Everything, every decision that we make. And so having a strong relationship with exhibitors and going back and forth on the way that we share data and information and whatnot theatrically, I think is a big part of that. But our marketing background, the founders of the Angel Studios, they were one of the leaders in using viral videos for launching consumer products for a lot of years, and we're kind of the top in that space before they started their kind of moving into film. And then they founded a company called VidAngel that basically brought them into the tech space. And then so they had this really prolific marketing background and then this tech background. So I've never seen a makeup of a distributor like what we have here. Even the team, it kind of is innovating and changing the way of looking at distribution from that. We have engineers and programmers and big marketing team and traditional advertising. And like, I'll bring up something as simple as like, we should do standees in theaters, like we can't track it, man. We're not doing it. Like, it's like,
wow. Okay. All right. So yeah.
And I really believe that fundamentally is a commitment to the filmmaker. Because there's a lot of ways in distribution to make you look like you've done something as a company and to make you look like you're working and buying lots of vanity advertising and lots of big advertising that can totally work, but may not move the needle at all. And so this idea of like, we're going to be super smart with the money, we're in partnership with the creator, the filmmakers, and if we're out just blowing money instead of really being smart about it, it's not a good partnership. So that's really, really important here. I mean, it's a core of our entire business model is how we interact with the filmmaker.
Yeah, right. It's good to bring it back to that. But you've got a lot of superpowers there, I think, already within the way the company's been built up. It's not been built up in the model of a traditional distributor. That's, I think, what makes it really interesting. Avril, does that resonate with you in terms of what Brandon's saying there about sort of cutting through?
Yeah, I mean, at Distribution Advocates, our whole MO is experiment and figure out, like, and it's a larger conversation. That's part of why we wanted to do the podcast. Is at the end of the day, we wanted to have a conversation about what does it look like to just do it differently. And honestly, it's a global conversation. It's like anything that anyone is doing that's better than what we have now is like part of the conversation, and so that resonates. I think anything that is finding ways to engage with the audience is an important process to put into the conversation. We're having conversations and doing experiments with marketing, and we mentioned that there's a lot of theaters that are shutting down. Where are the spaces that are community-based theaters or screening spaces that people don't necessarily know about or don't get the support? How do we funnel marketing in that area to get those get those spaces the resources that they need in order to be able to have films there and be able to exhibit? So it's also exhibition is part of that as well. Marketing.
Yeah.
I think in terms of breaking through, it's I just feel like we're in this place right now where we're all trying to find the solution because we all realize that it doesn't work. And so any conversations, any systems that are put in place, especially systems that are working, they're important parts of this conversation.
Yeah. And you're right, it's not a silver bullet, it's a conversation, it's a work in progress, isn't it? And it would just, it's why it's important to have these discussions. And, that's why I think it's great what you're doing, because, the podcast is a great way to do it, because you can talk about it and explore and build up that knowledge over time. A shout out to Christy Marchese on the call from Kinema, who I did it because Avril, you mentioned about communities and building communities from the ground up. There's Kinema doing some great work in that space. Sarah Moss's some Together films has also been on this series, also doing some really interesting work with communities. And yeah, I mean, it's challenging. I think we come back to that. We are approaching it from a filmmaker's point of view, and we'll be having another session. The next session on this series will be on marketing. We're going to really deep dive into reimagining marketing. There's some amazing stuff happening, for example, on TikTok and through branding and so on. But I think we'll get into that. But I think that from a sort of filmmaking point of view, you come back to that. You come back to that image which you painted so well at the start, Avril, of Sundance, and you get to Sundance and you've made it, and you're waiting to be picked. You're waiting, you've already been, you think you've been picked, but you haven't really been picked because you haven't been fired at that point, and you're not. And then it's not ultimately the rational way to proceed anymore, if it ever was. And it's, I think what we're talking about here is really trying to think about bringing distribution into that process of creativity, and whether that's through data, whether that's through community, whether that's through partnerships, even that's what needs to happen. But it's there's no rule book for that, and it's kind of like everyone's left on their own devices to sort of figure it out. So yeah, that's that's not, I don't know, that leaves us on a knife edge, but that feels like where things need to be. But then Sundance, and I use Sundance just as a general festival example, they're selling that dream as well. That's the whole mythos of it, and the mystique is this is what we offer. And so festivals, it's a complex tapestry.
Yeah, it is complex, and and we talked about this. We have a film festival episode on the podcast, and it's complicated because it's everybody's pick me, and at the same time, these festivals, they have certain obligations that they have to keep, and but again, in terms of filmmakers and our expectations and what we go into it with, I would really encourage anyone to listen to the podcast, but also on our Substack, the Distribution Advocates Substack. There is an article written by Anthony Koff about the study that we did on film festival. And it's not just Sundance. We did all of the top tier US film festivals, and we analyzed that data. And so it's looking at, how many films get sold out of Sundance, but also how many films get into Sundance. And so all of these things, again, like we did this study for filmmakers to put into perspective, our current model of the steps, right? And it's like, okay, you make a film, for a lot of us, I made the same mistake. This is part of the reason why I became part of Distribution Advocates, is because I made the same mistake as a you're like, we made a movie, we did the thing, we accomplished the thing. Like, you raised the money, you made the film, you got into it. Let's say you did get into, whether it's Sundance or South by or Tribeca or whatever, you got into the festival and you're like, we won. And then you're like, okay, now we want people to watch it. And then things fall apart. And so it's kind of, let's rethink the process. And so many times distribution is that thing that's thought of at the end. But it's like, let's pull that conversation up, and let's, I'm just really encouraging filmmakers to think about that from the very start of who is the audience, and think about that from day one. and really make decisions toward like the goal should be, this is our audience. How do we get this project? How do we get that there to them? And I think it's always there for everyone. You know, it's not like we don't make it for an audience, but it really is thinking about it from a business perspective and from a strategy perspective of like what makes the most sense. And there may be some instances, there probably be many instances where the current path in terms of what's been the accepted path for a film may not be it.
Yeah. Need to maybe flip the sequence or flip the model. Well, we've run out of time. This has been a fascinating part one. I think this is very much the start of a conversation, but I think it's just been fascinating to listen to you, Avril, and you, Brandon, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you to everyone, and thank you for joining. We will be releasing this on our podcast. So it's more than when it comes to distribution and marketing podcast. The marketing and distribution podcast will be available on there. And yeah, look, it's just great. As I say, we'll be doing a deeper dive into marketing, and I think my connection has gone. So I'm going to sign off here.
Thank you.
Made it through. But oh, you're back again. I don't know what's happening with my internet today. Thank you, guys. And thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.